Hello there and welcome to the Real Zero podcast with me, Daniel Grant, and
Hugh Montgomery.
Hugh, how's your week gone this week?
This week, well, of course, we're recording on a Monday, so we haven't had much of the week, but last week was some big wins, actually. Some big bits in energy policy, which will come out in the coming few months. We were running short of money, and a kind benefactor gave us a bit more to keep us going. So,
Lovely.
yeah, generally good. What about you?
Yeah, my week's been okay. I've been enjoying the random weather as I've been trying to play a bit of sport, but one day it's raining, one day it's super hot, and it hailed on one day as well.
Well, flooding in Bratislava, where a friend of mine lives, flooding throughout Europe. We're told today we've had a month's rainfall in 11 hours. But this is what happens, right? The jet stream, the northern jet stream moving north, and it's dumping all the rain that used to fall on southern Europe on us. And we lost 11% of Ukraine's agricultural economy last winter from flooding, and it's only going to get worse with climate change. But that's what we're here to talk about, right? How to stop it.
Yes, we are here to talk about it. And as always on the Real Zero podcast, what we like to do is take you through some of the real serious issues and take you into them in a really kind of a serious way that I think a lot of people don't really go past the surface. And we do that by having some expert guests on, and we have a really nice discussion about things, and hopefully at the end of it will give you some solutions to take things forward in a positive way.
Right, so this is all about action, isn't it? So, well, why don't we introduce our first guest? Because we've got with us Tom Parsons, haven't we, today?
Fantastic. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Welcome. Tom, why don't you tell us a bit about who you are?
Yes, Tom Parsons. I'm one of the directors at Good Energy. And you've kindly introduced me as an expert. So I know quite a lot about energy, everything from household consumption to installing things like solar panels and heat pumps and how to really decarbonise the whole house. And also on businesses as well, which are obviously quite big consumers. So helping them to decarbonise.
Lovely. And Hugh, over to you, because what we would like to do every time, the first question, I'll pass it over to you. Off you go.
Always our first question. So, Tom, there's always been this talk about climate change being a risk to future generations. What would be your timescale if people were to do nothing, right? If we all sit in our rear ends and go, oh, well, someone else will sort this out, and nothing happens. How long do you think before civilization as we know it starts unraveling in a meaningful way?
That's one of the big questions. I think it's a great place to start. I mean, I've been doing this for coming up on 20 years now, working in the decarbonisation space. And when we started 20 years ago, we were absolutely talking about our children and our children's children and making sure the planet was fit for them. Well, we're very much in the situation now where, well, let's make sure the planet's fit for us as well, because the timelines are happening a lot faster than I think everyone was predicting. And it's pretty apparent now that we're actually starting that change already to civilization. What is civilization is quite a big question. But we look at a couple of bits and pieces around what do we do here in the UK that sort of defines our civilization. So we start with something light touch, like holidays. You know, a lot of people in the UK like to go on holiday. Holidaying in Spain, well, it's starting to become too hot to go there at the moment, and that's only going to get worse.
Yeah, there's a sort of irony, isn't there, that flying to Spain makes it uninhabitable. We've seen this in Kenya and Australia and all sorts of other places.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So your typical holiday, and the same with the other places in Europe as well. I've had people coming back this year and saying it's too hot. I won't be going back there again. So you're starting to see disruption on things that are nice to have within the civilization. And then when we look at things that you need to have, let's talk about fresh water. In the UK, we expect to have water coming through our taps that are clean. And the water companies, actually, they're struggling at the moment. They're not doing a particularly good job. And times aren't too hard for them at the moment. Actually, they should be making hay while the sun shines and making themselves more robust. But climate change shifting that, so rising sea levels, well, a lot of the water companies' infrastructure, their pumping stations, their pipe works, that's going to end up underwater. So they're going to have to relocate millions of miles of pipe work just to be able to keep giving us the fresh water we're expecting at the moment.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, whilst we're getting massive flooding in the winters, and that's going to get worse, and there will be dry spells too, but we're going to see much greater, the summers are going to become more desiccated, aren't they?
Yep.
So the paper indeed in Nature today, and I forget, what day is it today, Dan? 23rd, 24th of September, is it, thereabouts?
It is, yeah, 23rd.
23rd, so paper in Nature today, looking at the average increase in long dry spells going up in coming decades by 20 days. That's going to make water supply pretty tricky, isn't it? And crop growth. I mean, food, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say that, we're not, the water companies in the UK at the moment aren't strong enough predominantly to be able to help us in the future. So I think that's going to happen quite quickly. And then look at the final point of, it's not a nice image, think about refugees in the street, climate refugees. And although we see in the Daily Mail at the moment, lots of talk about migration here, actually we're at a very, very small scale of migration right now. And that's going to become so much bigger as a result of climate change that we are going to see that happening in the streets. And I think, back to your original question of how long is this going to take? What's happening now, within 5 years, but we're going to see material impacts of that where we can no longer do things that we're used to doing that are a key part of our civilization.
I agree with you. And I think we've seen this with the people already forgetting about the big wobbles we've had with crop production in Europe, the heat waves in Europe 2 years ago, 2022, and the flooding, of course, putting up food prices this winter. So it's looking bad. We're looking at a decade or so before things are pretty awful. But we have a window, haven't we, in which we could avert that to a substantial degree. If we all do stuff today, in your heart, do you think if we all jump together today, we could make a difference?
Absolutely, yeah. I haven't given up yet, and I'm not building a bunker on a Hawaiian island like certain billionaires are to escape the climate crisis. I think that with enough of us, we can still make a material impact and avert most of this negativity we're seeing.
Right, well, let's talk then about what could be considered rather boring stuff. So we've talked about this before, Dan, haven't we, about what's these people refer to as scopes of emissions. Scope 1 being the emissions from your own house that you burn for your own business, burning the gas boiler, burning petrol in your car, putting coal on your fireplace. Most people, that's not terribly much. You can get an electric vehicle and you could get rid of your boiler and move electric. Scope 3 are the emissions from what you procure to happen or things you buy. But we're mainly going to be talking about Scope 2 today. So do you remember what Scope 2 is, Dan? Let's see if you can remember from previously, or do I have to tell you?
You have to tell me, Hugh. Okay.
All right. So Scope 2 are the emissions that you're responsible for from the power you buy. So most of us have an electricity supply, and I might get rid of my gas boiler. Let's suppose I am with some random electricity supplier. All right. Now, just whoever it is that I bought my house from, there's an electricity supply. If they're not a green supplier, and we'll come to that in a minute. Well, actually, just tell me, when that electricity, those electrons are flowing, where do they come from? How are they generated? What's the fuel mix in Britain now that's creating that power for me?
So you've got a very varied fuel mix in the UK, and actually there's been quite a lot of positivity over the years. When Good Energy started 25 years ago, so this is our 25th birthday, we're very excited about that. Thank you. 1% of the UK's grid was renewable. So the other 99% was using coal, gas, and nuclear.
And by renewable, you're meaning what? Wind, solar...
Hydro, wind, solar and hydro, and some bio and AD in there as well.
Okay. AD being...
anaerobic digestion.
Got you. So that's, you take the food, Dan, if you didn't know about that, and you ferment it, and that gives you methane, which you can burn. That turns it back into carbon dioxide, but you can put that, for instance, into greenhouses to help grow crops, and it provides heat and power generation so that the carbon gets recycled in a way.
Smart.
Yeah, although the only thing I'd add there is you don't want to be using food, ideally. You want to be using waste products.
Right.
So that,
And hardly we don't want waste food. Anyway, so carry on. So instead of those renewable things, it comes from coal, gas, oil.
Yes, coal, gas, oil, and then some nuclear in there as well, which is, that's what's causing the climate crisis. Let's be absolutely clear on that. And now we're at about 50%. Depending on which way you measure it, we're about halfway there. Now, that's good news in one way, 25 years to get to 50%, but equally we don't have another 25 years to get to another 50%.
Got you.
But good news. So wind has had another record year this year. So that is overtaken gas as the majority generation type. So that's wind power, both offshore and onshore, is now beating gas. And for the last, since civilization properly started and started consuming fossil fuels, it's been coal or gas that's been number one on the fuel mix up until now. And now wind's overtaken that, which is fantastic.
That's really good news. And I think this government, we've heard in the last month or so, we're now recording in September, but in the last month, we've heard quite a lot of investment, I think, to get more new to ground renewables. Is that right?
Yes, they're using mechanisms like the contracts for difference, which just enable the right funding to go to projects, give them that consistency of earnings so that they can build them. And they're also doing a lot of support for onshore wind as well, which is just as important. The renewable mix in the UK should be a mixture of different technology types and different assets. There is no silver bullet. We don't need to put all of our money into one thing. So supporting different technology types is the right way to go to build a resilient grid going forwards.
Good. I was going to ask you about that because the thing that people that want to criticise is a couple of things. Firstly, they say, renewable energy is vastly too expensive. Then I hear we've got to stop these renewable subsidies. It's only possible because of subsidies, and we don't subsidise oil and gas. And the third thing I hear is, we can't balance the grid. When the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, of course we need to be burning oil. So let's deal with each of those in turn, shall we? What's the cost of generating electricity from, let's say, a wind turbine or from a solar panel compared to burning coal or oil or gas?
Well, there's a couple of costs that go into it. So first of all, it's just the cost of making that electricity at the time. And actually, solar and wind right now is cheap. So it's cheaper, I would say, than gas or coal. I mean, there isn't much coal in the UK anymore, but historically cheaper. Then you've got that balancing. So when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining, where do you get the power from? So that's the secondary cost that kind of sits alongside that. But we've had people saying from for decades that renewables, we can't increase anymore. Well, we got to 50%. And you know what? There weren't any massive negative issues. And in fact, the thing that drove the biggest price spike in the last 20 years has been a chap overseas who's a bit of a megalomaniac, and he has control over gas and gas prices. Of course, I'm talking about Putin. So it's gas and it's that fossil fuel that drives crazy prices and also volatility in prices.
And of course, we know, I was putting up a straw doll there, or a straw person. We heavily subsidise fossil fuel extraction and use, heavily subsidise it, and we don't pay for the externalities of the pollution and the impacts on health either. So it is a bit of a fallacy to say that renewables are subsidised and fossil fuels are not. You'd agree with that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and it's bad business. Yeah, more and more people are saying it's bad business to extract resources now and sell them at a cost to future generations. And that's exactly what fossil fuel profits are. They're taking something away from future generations, as in a livable planet, and then living under the conditions we do.
Our generation, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a very fair point. Whereas investing in something like renewables is doing the exact opposite. It's building something now that actually makes things lower cost and more resilient for future generations and ourselves, in the next 20 years.
So installing solar and wind, as we've heard, is now cheaper. There's obviously a bit more of an upfront cost, but once you've put the upfront cost in, there really isn't a cost to generating that power at all. So it becomes cheap and predictable in terms of its price, as you've said. So a good reason to move. And the subsidy issue we've nailed as well. What about this business of when the sun isn't blowing and the wind, when the sun isn't shining, the wind isn't blowing, we have to switch to something else. There are ways around that there to a degree, aren't there, about when we use our power and how we can balance supply and demand. We can make a difference to that, can't we, before we even have to think about deploying another source of energy. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's about creating that right mix, both of generation, so creating the supply, and then also how demand uses it, so how you and I use it in our households, and also how businesses consume electricity. And creating that right generation mix is important. So it's a mix of when the wind isn't blowing, or sometimes it's sunny, so you've got some solar on. You also got hydro, so the river's flowing, and hopefully if the planet's doing okay, the rivers are still flowing. And then you've got that anaerobic digestion that I mentioned earlier. So that mix altogether gives you some base load, which means it's generating most of the time, and then some intermittent, which means it's on and off depending on whether it's sunny or windy.
And presumably we've got interconnectors already, right, with other countries. So presumably we could deliver them power when it's very sunny here and we've got more than we need, or whether it's very blowy here and we've got more than we need, or equally we could be using Norwegian hydroelectric power when it's pouring with rain and their reservoirs are full, or we could be using Spanish solar, for instance. Presumably this is interconnecting is going to make a difference, is it?
Absolutely, and it's interesting because the climate crisis is going to force people apart. Countries are going to get into sort of trying to be separate, protect their borders, and all that interconnectivity broadly breaks down. Whereas the solution to the climate crisis is actually getting closer together. So those interconnectors, those great cables, it's always sunny in the Sahara, certainly in the daytime. It creates a great amount of sun. So solar panels there and then exporting that, fantastic idea, drives value into the economy there as well. Likewise with the Norwegian hydro that you mentioned there. But also, one of the reasons fossil fuels have been subsidised, as you say, they've had loads of subsidies over the decades, is because it creates jobs in the UK, which is very important. But the renewables revolution is what's going to create the net jobs for the next 50, 100 years. Yeah. And we can be world leaders in that. We got very close, and then we retracted a bit, and then we said, not in my backyard anymore. So if we invest in that, we can export the power through these cables, we can export the technology and the skills, and that drives a lot of value for UK PLC.
Now, what about other ways of coping when the sun isn't shining, the wind isn't blowing? Where are the futures for storing the energy? And I'm thinking of storing it as batteries, or maybe pumping water up tops of mine shafts and then letting it down again, or maybe storing it as heat, or storing it as a chemical that we can burn, ammonia or hydrogen, for instance. Where do you see those sorts of technologies for using renewables to create something that we can then use when it's dark and quiet and the wind isn't blowing and there is no sunshine?
Yeah.
Is that a big opportunity for us?
Absolutely. Good energy, we're very big on whole home decarbonisation. So how do we make it as easy as possible for people to decarbonise both their scope 1 and their scope 2, and also then contribute to that grid balancing? So our products interact quite well. So you've got the electricity supply, that 100% renewable coming in through your cables, and we'll probably touch a bit more on what 100% renewable means in a minute. But then on top of that, right, it's solar on the rooftop and a battery that sits next to it. So when the sun's not shining, the battery's charging. You can use that in the evenings when it's dark. That helps the grid because it means you don't have to take the power from a coal station or a gas station that's 200 miles away. And on top of that, you decarbonise your heat. You get an electric heat pump. And effectively, by using an electric heat pump, well, let's say there's a lot of renewable generation on the grid. Okay, you use your heat pump to heat your house, so that's creating some thermal storage within inside your house.
Right.
And then suddenly when the grid's short, you can turn the heat pump off for half an hour. The house isn't going to get cold, and it just really helps with that grid balancing. And a supplier like Good Energy can do that for you without you having to do anything with fancy apps or complicated things. Just keep your house warm and your house low carbon.
Well, look, that's an interesting point. So, Dan, I'm looking across to you then, right? So, because you are representative of all the people like me who aren't experts on these domains. So, do you know what a heat pump is and how it works? It sounds like magic pixie dust, doesn't it? You've got this thing, and out of nowhere, it heats your house more cheaply than. I mean,
yes.
Do you get how that works, or do we need?
I don't really get how it works. I see heat pump quite a lot in the news, and
normally people saying, "Oh, that won't work in your
exactly.
building."
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't really get it.
All right, come on then, Tom. Tell us how an air source heat pump. Let's go with air source because that's what you supply, right? Or do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, you do two choices: air source or ground source. And ground source takes a lot more work, and you need a much bigger garden. So we do air source because it's suitable for many more homes within the UK, and it's a lot more sort of plug and play.
All right, so I ring you up, and you come and say, "All right, Hugh, I'll stick an air source heat pump." How does that work, and why does it save me money?
Yeah. Well, the good news is we're not just going to stick one in your house. So you get a survey where we look at the heat load of your house. So you get a really good design to say, well, how much heat does your house need, and what temperature do you want it? Do you want it at 21 degrees throughout the year, or do you want it at 19? And then we design it around that. So it really is a design for your specific house. So a lot of the questions people ask of, will I be warm? Well, yes, that we can design it to make sure it's specific for your exact house. And in terms of how does the technology itself work, it's been around for well over 100 years. So a lot of people think it's a new technology. It's not. The Scandinavian countries in particular have been using it for decades, and they get very cold up there.
They do.
But it just uses electricity to take some of the heat out of the air outside. So even when the air's cold outside, even when it's minus degrees, you can still take heat from that. It uses a compressor and a refrigerant and turns that heat from the air into heat into a water system, much like your boiler would heat water in your house. And then that runs through radiators in your house, just like probably your current system, and keeps you warm. Right.
And just to make that clear, of course, because people are going to say, hang on, it's a minus temperature. There can't be energy in the atmosphere. But of course, there's energy above minus 273, isn't there? So anything above that, there is energy in the atmosphere. And all we're doing is drawing that energy out and concentrating it in some way.
That's right. And when you use gas, the energy is the gas. You're burning gas, and therefore, for every 1 unit of gas, you get about 0.8, 0.9 units of heat out of the back of it. Whereas when you're using electricity to take heat from the air, well, the fuel source is the air outside your house. The electricity is just helping you convert that, which means you get a much better efficiency. Our heat pumps tend to be between 360 and 400% efficient, which means for 1 unit of electricity you use, you're getting about 3.5 to 4 units of heat coming out the back of it.
And the big question, okay, let's suppose I've got a 2-bedroom flat. I mean, you can't tell me, of course, what the general price will be, but give me a rough idea. What's my sort of bracket for that, and what's my payback time on it?
Well, so heat pumps in the UK currently get the boiler upgrade scheme grant, which is applicable for most properties. So if you're taking out existing heating infrastructure, so gas boiler or an oil boiler or anything like that, you're eligible for what's known as the boiler upgrade scheme. And that's £7,500 off your heat pump. So that can take a big chunk of the total cost of the heat pump and the installation for you and any new pipe work you need. So we've sold and installed hundreds of these over the course of the last year or two. And the typical price I see is anywhere between, let's say, £1,000 and £7,000 after that grant's taken off. And that depends on the size of the house. We deal with quite a lot of big, complicated jobs as well.
And we know that if I were to sell it, that I'm going to get my money back because this is a sort of an added value that people like in buying a house. So, but let's suppose I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to live there until I die. What's my payback time-ish for an average sort of small household, do you think?
Well, payback time, it's quite difficult to do it without knowing how much losses your house is going to get. I know you're very keen for an answer on this one, Hugh. There's a couple of bits I would say about a heat pump that just make it more attractive than a boiler. I mean, the first one is it's not using fossil fuels and destroying the environment. We're very clear on that. Yeah. Secondly is warranty of 15 years, as opposed to a boiler tends to be about 10 years. So that life expectancy is 5 years longer. So you have to replace the kit that much sooner. And the ones we install also have remote monitoring. So the second we see something that doesn't look right in your house, as in the temperatures have dropped a bit or the fan speed isn't working right, we can see that remotely. We'll give the household a call and say, something might not be right. Let's test these things out and make sure your house stays warm. Whereas with a boiler, you find out it's not working when the taps aren't hot or it's cold when you wake up in the morning. And that's really important for long-term peace of mind for households as well.
So I think, we have to do the right thing in life, and there will be a payback. You will get your money back at some point, but it's the right thing to do, and the cost from some people won't be too exorbitant, and you'll get your cash back when you sell your house. The other bit we should talk about, Dan, is just what you can do to lower your heating costs in homes anyway, because the conventional wisdom is that if you were to turn your radiators down by a degree, you save 7 to 11% of your costs and your greenhouse gas emissions. So if you are someone who likes to wander around in your underwear and a t-shirt in the middle of winter in your flat, you're, in my view, a bit crazy because you're spending a lot of cash. By turning down 3 or 4 degrees, you could be nearly halving your bills and your carbon footprint. Yeah. And there's some interesting bits. Obviously, if we wear more clothing, so a thermal base layer and a couple of jumpers or whatever, or if you're a bit mad like me, a thicker jacket when I'm inside in a hat, you can make a difference. The other thing is, do you know the difference in women and men's perception of temperature? There's a question. You're a doctor. Do you know this stuff?
Women's and men's
perception of temperature. So let's imagine I'm a woman and you're a man, and we are in a room together, or separate rooms.
Hugh, I can only judge this on my current relationship, which would be I feel a lot warmer than she does half the time.
And you would be right. But how much difference? So if I was to give you both a room, and without you knowing there was just a knob, but you don't know what it's turning to, but you set the knob until you feel comfortable, what's the difference in degrees from what your partner will set it to and you, Dan? Do you think?
I'm going to say 3 degrees.
You're spot on. It's 3 degrees.
Yes.
Well done.
But why is that?
Well, we haven't got time today to talk about the complex thermal physiology, but we could. But here's a really interesting top tip. A great deal of a woman's perception of temperature that differs from a man's comes from their hands.
Okay.
So if a woman's hands get cooler, she will perceive herself to be very much colder. And just by wearing, for instance, they can be quite nice. You could get some very fashionable gloves, fingerless gloves. Just by having those on, still type, still do stuff, her perception will be that it's 3 degrees warmer than it was before the gloves went on. And that could save you 33% of your electricity bill or your heating bill. There you are.
Gloves for Christmas, everyone.
Right. So let me come back then. Thank you. Sorry, it was a diversion there, Tom.
Very good.
We're turning our heating down now, and we're going to get a heat pump, and we've decided that heat pump is going to be charged or powered by good energy. Why good energy then? Because there are lots of green tariffs. We were talking about that over a cup of coffee just now, that there are lots of companies, insert name of oil company here, green tariff. Why isn't that good, right? So if I've got Dan Grant green tariff, isn't that green? Shouldn't I just be happy with that?
No, unfortunately not. You know, I think the cat, if it's not out the bag, it's going to come out the bag right now, is that when you buy 100% green tariff, you're not buying 100% green tariff. You know, the industry's set up not very well to actually certify itself, to say, yes, that this power came from one of those renewable sources we mentioned earlier. And unfortunately, the regulation's been too slow to catch up with that, which means a lot of unscrupulous players in the marketplace sell you something that they know isn't green, but they know you're going to buy it because it looks like it's green.
Right. So I want to have all of my power that I use coming from 100% renewables, right? That's really genuinely very important to me.
Yep.
So what's the difference then? I mean, I know that the greenwashy people will be saying the green tariff, but it might only be 10% of their mix because they're ticking a box about what they've got to do by law. What's the difference between who are the genuinely green companies that are genuinely trying to do it, apart from good energy? And then what's the differentiator between them?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, if we talk about genuine green, you've got Ofgem, the regulator, have said, well, there's 3 suppliers out there that we think are genuinely green, genuinely investing more in renewables. Right. And that's us, Good Energy, a company called 100 Green, and Ecotricity.
Right.
So I'll park those for a second and just touch on what everyone else is doing in the market when they sell 100% renewable tariff. Well, first of all, they're going to sell that to some customers, and all the rest are going to get slightly worse power. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'd argue they're not doing any good there. They're just charging some people more for a green tariff, and everyone else just loses out a bit more.
Right.
So it's probably not the best. If you want to genuinely contribute towards renewables, that's probably not the best way to do it. But they'll also just buy renewable certificates. So this is where you're allowed to separate the power and these certificates, which means you can go out and buy a load of gas power, buy some very cheap certificates, put them together and say it's renewable. It's a nuance of our system that enables you to do that, but it isn't the right way of doing things. So then I come back to what makes good energy different is the fact that we don't do that. We've got 2,500 renewable generators across the UK. That's a hydro site at the base of Mount Snowdon on a little stream, or it's a farmer that's put solar panels on their milking shed. And we buy their renewable power and we buy the certificates at the same time. Those stay together. And then when a household or a business consumes electricity in a house, that's the power and the certificates we allocate to them. So we keep it together throughout the process.
Well, great. I mean, so that's good. I like the sound of that very much. But does that mean I'm being conned by everyone else in that market? And the second question, I suppose, for you is why, when Putin invaded Ukraine and prices for gas generation electricity went through the roof, I'm with Good Energy. Why did my bill go up? That seems peculiar when you're a customer, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. So I'll touch on both of those. So first of all, are the others misleading you? Absolutely. It is greenwashing, and the regulator's catching up. And so are things like the Advertising Standards Agency. They're saying things like, you can't call this 100% green because it isn't. So they're moving slightly faster than the energy regulator itself. But we've got organisations like the Green Buildings Council that say, right, well, when you're building a building which consumes a lot of electricity, how do we verify that it is genuinely renewable?
Right.
And they say, well, only the Good Energy way of doing things, which is matching generators to consumers on an hour-by-hour basis, is a way of proving it's green. Any other mechanism, you can't call it green anymore. So that's saying, right, well, here's the standard. If you want to meet that, that's the only way to do it. And the regulator is catching up. So they're changing the regulations, but whether that happens in 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, I don't know. So for now, those other unscrupulous suppliers, I would say, unfortunately, will carry on doing what they're doing. And then in terms of the pricing thing, well, why did renewable prices jump at the same time as gas? And that's because the UK energy system effectively says, right, well, whatever the highest price is, the last unit of electricity that comes into the system, that's the price everybody gets. So because things like renewable power is sold on the wholesale market, then it's priced effectively at the same level as gas. When gas jumps up, so does the cost of renewables.
That sounds nuts, doesn't it? Because that's not the way to encourage, given that the cost of generation is lower over the 10 or 15 years, a lot lower for solar and wind. I'd have thought that it'd be nice for me it would encourage me to move, wouldn't it? If I saw the price being lower.
Absolutely, and there are some ways you can do it. You can, if you're building let's say you're building a new solar farm, and you can say, right, I'm going to sign up to a 15-year power purchase agreement. You might agree to sell that at, let's say, £50 a megawatt hour because that covers your costs, and then that is baked in, so that's then built into the supplier's costs. But lots of the generators we work with, they sell on a 1 year or 2 year basis, and the only way they can work out what their power is worth is by looking at the wholesale market and saying, right, well, power today is worth £90 a megawatt hour. I'm going to sell you my product for what it's worth. Which can create a bit of a challenge. But what I would say is, I spent a lot of time talking to our generators, and lots of them, when they made more money than they were expecting over the last 18 months, they've then said, right, well, how do I reinvest that? So how do I build more? So right now, the team are installing solar on top of a hydro station. The hydro station was built 15 years ago. It's part of the feed-in tariff scheme. They made a bit more money than they expected. So now they're saying, right, let's get 16 solar panels on the top and increase our generation. So at least they're reinvesting those profits into more renewables as opposed to into more oil and gas extraction.
And there are other companies, aren't there, which I would imagine be quite a good partner to you. So I get my electricity from you, from Good Energy, but I could buy into Ripple, for instance, who allow me to essentially own part of the wind farm or the solar. And I've done that for friends and relatives as a gift, basically, to say, well, you now own part of the energy infrastructure of the United Kingdom. So those sorts of marriages, it seemed to me, to be quite good. Not that one should exclude the other, but the two together is quite nice to have, isn't it?
Yeah, I really like the Ripple business model of building assets and letting communities own them spread out across the UK, and then using the supplier to effectively pay you back your share of what that's worth. And that enables you to benefit from some of those higher prices as well as we go through it.
Okay, look, I'm going to pan back to Dan in a second. I've got one other question for you, because there is always this feel that, well, what I do doesn't make any difference, right? I wear my thick coat and put my hat on, and I do my best, and I've moved to Good Energy. But there's Dan prancing around in his underwear in the middle of winter, flying on his commercial jet. Give me an idea, and I do know the answer, of course. How much are we saving if I go to 100% renewable power to do my heating and my electricity in an average UK home? It's quite a lot of carbon dioxide, isn't it, over a year?
Yes, you are. It does make a material difference. Now, there's a couple of bits at play here. Number one is, yes, you're reducing that scope 2 that we spoke about earlier, emissions, which is important. Secondly, though, by having 100% renewable, you're enabling us at Good Energy to go out and find another generator, pay them some more money so that they can build more assets, and you're increasing that percentage of renewables on the grid, that 50% number I said earlier. And an example of that is, as I said, 2,500 generators with us at the moment. That's grown by 800 over the last 18 months, and 400 of those were new connections. So new build renewables that wouldn't have been built otherwise. So individuals can make a difference. It enables us to grow that renewable share. But also, when we look at, I guess, scope one a little bit more of, right, well, things like the fabric of the home and how do I reduce that carbon footprint of transport and things like that. Well, an average house is about 4 tons of CO2 through heat, electricity, and transport per year.
Right.
And if you install an electric heat pump, if you get the right renewable tariff, if you install solar and battery, and you switch to an EV and get an EV charger, that effectively goes down to 0 tons. So you're going down from 4 tons down to 0 tons from those elements that contribute to the carbon footprint in your house, which is massive. 4 tons per year from your household that can be eradicated.
Absolutely. And just the electricity, if I just moved to you today, that's 1.1 tons. So that's call it 1,000 kilograms. And each kilogram, you remember how many litres a kilogram is, Dan? 520 litres of carbon dioxide. So you can do your own maths, 1,000 kilos. So that's over 500,000 litres of CO2 that every one of us can save just by moving our electricity supply. And if we do those other things as well, we can do 4 times that. Yeah. And it does change the market. The investors will look at it and go, hang on, the money's moving to that green stuff. Maybe we should be there. Any other question you'd like to put, since we've got an expert in the room, Dan?
Yeah, I just want to call back a bit to... how green are we in the UK at the moment? So how many people are using renewables now? How far are we away from 100%?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's that grid mix that really matters. So the fact that we're at 50% at the moment means that, if you line everyone up, half the UK is using renewables at any given point, and that includes businesses, and half aren't. So we've still got a fair distance to go. Now, Good Energy, we've got 200,000 customers, and they either buy energy from us, 100% renewable energy, or they sell it to us, so solar panels on their roofs and things like that. And of course, many do both. But that number needs to be a lot higher. Every customer that comes to us and makes that conscious decision to take action is making a material difference. So, 200,000 is great, but it's, we have 70 million people in the UK.
Yeah.
So that number needs to be a lot higher.
Yeah, and if we go towards 100%, do we actually have the capacity of renewables to match the demand, or do we have to we're going to have to build a lot more wind turbines, solar panels, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to build a lot more, and government's doing it at the right level with those contracts for difference and building new wind, which is great. These big grand schemes linking up with industry, but at the same time, households can become micro generators. And we talk about those crazy power prices we saw over the last couple of years. Well, the best way of avoiding those is having solar on your roof. Because once you've got that solar installed, you know what your costs are going to be for the next 25 years.
I don't know where you live in, actually. What sort of house have you got? Do you rent or do you own a place? And has it got any roof?
We own a place. We've got a roof, but we've just refurbished it. So we've only just moved in. However, the next door neighbour has some nice solar panels. So we're talking about that kind of thing at the moment.
Well, it's worth doing. I mean, I have to say that in a place that I used to have, I rent now, so I can't do it. But I had solar panels on. And the thing which we found was, firstly, it pays back really quickly. I mean, what is the payback time now for solar panels? It's 3 to 6 years?
Yeah, it depends where you're at. I mean, for a business, and there are a lot of businesses in the UK, payback is anywhere between 3 and 6 years, which is brilliant. Households, probably more like 7 to 9 years.
But it's again, still basically you'll get the same price that you were paying anyway.
Yeah.
And then you've paid it all, and after that, basically, it's free. Yeah. The other fun bit is, weirdly, you get paid for the electricity you generate even when you're using it. So if you're switch your washing machine on because the sun is shining like crazy and it's July, and you do all the stuff when that's happening, or you've got a battery, whatever, you're still getting paid for the generation even though you're using the electricity. So the property we used to have, we made a pretty healthy profit on top of having zero energy costs every year. So it's certainly worth doing. I
mean, that is quite something, isn't it? Something to really bear in mind, especially if you're... Tom, you mentioned earlier that you said we were quite close, or the government was quite close, and things were moving in the right direction, and then it just went the wrong way. Can I call you back to that? What was that about?
Well, it's just the bouncing around of policy. So a good example is there's a lot of noise in the papers about boiler tax. Well, there is no such thing as a boiler tax. But what the government was trying to do 2 years ago was incentivise people to take the right choice, heat pumps, electricity, instead of using gas. So they said to boiler manufacturers, right, you've got to manufacture a certain amount of heat pumps. And they said, all right, this is going to come in from this date. So everybody started ramping up towards that. And then they changed their minds, which meant it's just really hard for industry to decide what should I be manufacturing and when. So that was pulled away. And now Labour is saying, absolutely, it's the right thing to do. We will put that mechanism back in place, which enables more heat pumps to be installed and more boilers to be effectively replaced. So it's that sort of flim-flamming around policy, which you just can't afford to have as an industry when you're trying to transition 70 million homes in the UK. And it's worth touching on that specific mechanism as well, because there's it's being called a boiler tax, which is a bit odd in itself, but this mechanism has already been used around EVs. When electric vehicle manufacturers were trying to grow, governments around the world put in place support that said, combustion engine car companies, you have to manufacture a certain amount of EVs, or you have to pay those that are manufacturing them. And that worked. We have so many EVs on the road at the moment, which are consuming a lot of renewable energy, taking fossil fuel cars off the road. So this sort of mechanism does work, and it does help us transition at scale.
Okay. One last question I've got before we then move on to just kind of like wrapping up and what we can do. Are there any other energies coming? Because I know we touched on fusion in the previous podcast, but only really quickly. Is there anything that we can look forward to, or I think anything like that?
Yeah, I'll have to listen back to the podcast about fusion then, but my view is the old joke that it's always 10 years away. It's been 10 years away since the 50s, and it's at least 10 years away now. And then we can touch on hydrogen as well. And I've got... The principles of hydrogen are relatively sound, especially green hydrogen. There's excess wind, you use it to make hydrogen. Now, that works in principle, but...
And that's easy. You just split water, because that's H2 and an O.
Yes.
And you make the electricity, and you just have an electrode, you split the water, and off bubbles hydrogen.
Yep. The big problem I have with hydrogen is that it's being hailed as a bit of a silver bullet, and also it's a emerging technology. So it kind of tells everyone, wait, just wait, hydrogen's coming, we're going to save you with hydrogen. And I'll tell you who the ones that are investing in hydrogen are. It tends to be big oil. This is their next business model where they think they can keep going for another 50, 100 years, making huge profits. So they're very much incentivized to convince you that's the right choice. But we've been through this with hydrogen cars. You look on Auto Trader today and see how many second-hand hydrogen cars you can buy. It's probably less than 10. You look at how many second-hand EVs you can buy. It's tens of thousands. Electricity coming down existing cable infrastructure. You can charge your vehicle. Transporting hydrogen to a car, driving around, doesn't make sense. And the same for household usage as well, to say, well, we'll just swap your gas out for hydrogen. You don't need to do that. You can use electricity for your heating. You don't need to have this expensive infrastructure pipe work, and you don't need to have it transported around. So hydrogen has a small use case, probably for large industrial clusters where you've got very high consumers of gas at the moment.
Steel.
Yes, exactly. That's its case. But for anyone that's being sold it as this is the solution, just hold back and wait. We're gonna save the world with hydrogen is being misled in my view.
Yeah. I agree, Dan. I mean, I think we could talk about small modular nuclear reactors and all these other things, but let's imagine we get those small modular nuclear reactors. Let's suppose they're out there in 15 years' time. It's too late.
Yeah.
We started with that. So it's great that they may be coming downstream, but what we've got to do right now is decarbonise immediately. So let's just refresh what we've heard today. We've heard that not all power coming through your cables is green. It's about 50% of that coming in. Mm-hmm. There's a big move, though. We're doing really well. The fact we've got to 50% is good. We know that if we all move our electricity suppliers to 100% renewable supplier, a genuine 100% renewable supplier, that money funds more generation and accelerates the move to being green and saves a lot of carbon in the process, as well as moving the market at not a great deal of cost, that we can get good payback on solar and we can get good payback on ground or air source heat pumps rather. That's what I've heard today, I think. Is that what you told us, Tom, or have I missed something out?
No, I think that's bang on. What we didn't touch on was actually switching and how easy that is.
Oh,
yeah,
right,
that
so
was going to be my last question to you, because, what can I do today?
Well, I'll rephrase that. What must we all do today if we are not already with 100% renewable supplier? So, how do we do it? So someone listening to this right now, you're going to get yourself a glass of wine or a cup of coffee once the kids are in bed or whatever, and you're going to sit at your computer and you're going to do what? Get
on goodenergy.co.uk, and from there you can switch to us. We've got a market-leading EV tariff, so if you do have an EV at the moment, or you just want to power your house and your washing machine cheaper overnight, use that. That's less than 7 pence a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
Really easy to switch to. Or you can switch to a standard tariff as well. Mm-hmm. And on there also, if you want to know what a heat pump would cost for your property, we've got a tool you can use to get an initial estimate. That's even faster than We Buy Any Car, so you can do that in about 45 seconds.
But when I move, this takes hours, or is it? I mean, when I sit there, am I going to be locked in all evening trying to move to Good Energy?
Not at all. Few simple details on there, and then we'll take it from there. We're the Good Energy, the highest rated supplier on Trustpilot, so you're in that best customer service care as we transition you through that process. There's a 14-day cooling off period as part of that as well. And we also got apps as well. So our app on Google Play is rated at 4.9 out of 5, and on Apple it's at 4.7. So really easy for people to track that transition.
Just reassure me, if I was to move, as I actually already have, of course, but let's imagine I hadn't. any danger that I suddenly find my power gets cut off tomorrow morning and that I can't switch the lights on for the kids and the TV doesn't work?
No, absolutely not. Nothing's changing in terms of that physical infrastructure. It's just a data flow that says you're now with good energy, and then you get to that great renewable power and the service that comes with it.
Okay, so we're going to do that, and we're having talked about it before. We've made sure if we haven't done it, we're going to move our bank accounts, aren't we? And there are a few other things too.
Yeah, lots of things to do, and we'll leave the links in the podcast description for anything like this, and they can go to Good Energy and find out for themselves. Start that journey today.
Great.
I've moved my bank thanks to you, Hugh, as well, so I'm listening and I'm learning.
Good for you, thank you, Alex. And I should just comment, Dan, Real Zero, that is doing these podcasts.
Yeah.
You're doing this for nothing. We're not getting paid for it.
No.
And just for transparency, there is no commercial relationship with anyone that we recommend in their products and services. There's no kickback. We're not on consultancy fees. There's no money flowing here.
Yep.
So we're not recommending services because we think that we can make a quick buck out of them.
No, for sure, for the greater good.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much, Tom. See you next time, Hugh.
See you next time now.